What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and this video, I want to talk about Scream 7 yet again and Mark Evans. And I kind of want to just focus in on this character. Look, I've had a couple of weeks to think about this, and honestly, I feel like the writing's kind of on the wall for this guy. Now, I kind of briefly touched upon that, right, when the Kincaid versus not Kincaid thing was going around. But I kind of want to go more in depth because if you actually remember in that video, I talked about how there's still this like weird feeling within me where it's like, you can see why they would maybe want to kill him off and it makes sense. And we're going to go through some of those reasons in this video. But then it's like, well, it's her husband, but then it's also not Patrick Dempsey. So then it's like, do I care as much, right? So I kind of want to flesh that out here. But I have seen some of the classic Scream creators out there, good friends of the channel, that are kind of echoing the same thing. Like, it seems like Mark Evans is going to be killed off in the movie. And this is just speculation. This is not like a confirmation or anything. But I will say it makes a lot of sense. And the first and maybe only reason you actually kind of need, right? What would make this like a legitimate scare for Sidney, right? Like, what would really push this to kind of uncharted territory? And again, there's some like hesitancy in me where it's like, okay, even if it's not Patrick Dempsey, and even if it's not, the fan kind of coming together of Sidney and Mark Kincaid, even if it's not that, you still have in this fictional world, of course, right? She's been married for decades, and she's got 3 kids, right? And it's like, to come in and to kill off the father feels harsh, really killing off any of them. I mean, it's a family of 5, right? Killing off any of them seems like a very harsh thing to do. You can't kill kids. So, like, the 2 kids that are, like, rumored to be whatever, in between, like, 6 and 10, let's say, you're not taking them out, right? And I would never want that. It's just something that you just don't do in these movies. Okay, they're out. Even the oldest daughter, I really don't think that makes a lot of sense. I also don't think it makes sense for that character to be Ghostface, okay? Well, now you go to her husband. One thing you can say, actually, you can say 2 things, right? One thing in terms of Ghostface is I think it makes absolutely no sense. I haven't seen a lot of discussion around that, but I think that's a character you can safely say and I'm sure we will, when we go through the entire cast, when we see the trailers and stuff, and like, okay, who seems like their Ghostface? And, we've talked about even the reported number of how many Ghostface. I won't say it in case you consider it a spoiler, but we kind of know how many roughly there's going to be in this movie. Okay, I think you can rule him out. So that's one thing you can say. But then you can also say, okay, well, could he be a potential victim? Look, factually, he would be the most in danger of the 5. Again, you do not kill the 2 youngest daughters. I don't think you kill the oldest daughter. I don't think you kill Sidney. I think that's just a no-go. So you really only have 1, okay? And again, there's this balancing act of like, well, it's the father to those 3 kids. It's a character that Sidney has been in love with, ideally. If it's a good relationship, she would be in love with him for the last 20-plus years or however long it might have been that they got together and had these kids. But again, that push-pull inside me, then I think too, okay, but these movies do have to have stakes, and I have to remember that. And when you go down the list and you say, okay, well, is Nev and, Sidney Prescott safe? Yes. Is Gale safe? Probably, most likely, right? But you go down the list. I think it would be unfair to say, and you get to him, and you say, yeah, he's safe. He's a character that you can't take out. I feel like you got to balance it. I have to, okay? Because I think actually other people said, oh, yeah, he's done for. And I kind of pushed back on that. I would like to retract that statement because, again, you have to have stakes. And I think you look at 5, and, we've talked about this before, but, for what they did to Dewey and how they did it, and, yeah, the combativeness that they had, within the fandom, one thing that I think actually worked really well is, like, you do need some stakes, but number 1, you need stakes. I mean, the movie was kind of meta with that anyway. But number 2, you did also need reasons for this to kind of be personal to us as the audience as well as these characters, and also just to get Sidney back, right? When you're doing this kind of hybrid movie of like new cast, old cast, these people have gone through it fictionally, right? It's like they've been through it so many times, and I like how they played that off, right? Where it's like Gale and Sidney were over it, throughout 5. They were just over it. They didn't want to be there because they didn't want to be there, right? They lived their life and they lived that part of it, and they kind of wanted to just push it away. Well, now it kind of came back and it took out a dear friend to Sidney, and then obviously we know the relationship with Gale. So You do, I think, need that. Well, it's tough because I would say you need that every time. You do need a reason why this keeps happening, and eventually the tough thing is, right, as these characters get older and as they've done, or the characters, also I guess the actors, and just like how many times these people have done it, you got to keep almost like upping the ante of like, why should they care? Why is this a thing where they need to like take care of it themselves, or instead of running away from the problem, confront the problem? Like, what would make somebody in their late 40s, let's say, fictionally Sidney Prescott, like what would make somebody do something like that? And well, if you take out her husband of 20 years, that's a pretty darn good reason. I know there's some people speculating of like what you could do as the opening. I mean, you can start to get really speculative, right? And be like, okay, if Patrick Dempsey turned this thing down for money, you got to imagine he's not in it much. And then it's like, okay, I just imagine he's not in it much, but he was asking for more money. And they said, well, you're not in it too much, so why should you get the more money? However that broke down, right? But if that was the reason, which I think should be at least considered, well, does that mean her husband goes into hiding with the kids, or does that, like, what does that mean? Is he taken out right away? I mean, you got to give Sidney a reason for doing this, and you probably want to do it as early as possible, right? But at the same time, and we've kind of talked about this too, I mean, you do have her daughter and like her friend group, and this is going to be, I imagine, a movie of, you got like a semi-older cast, then you got like this younger generation, but that younger generation is tied directly to Sidney because of her daughter. So if you had attacks within her daughter's friend group, right, that would also keep Sidney, I think, interested. Like, the thing is, you do not have to, I think, kill him off, but he's definitely there for the taking. And if you want to get super, super personal to Sidney and really give it a good reason why she should care about this, like, series of attacks, that is a way of doing it. And I will say again, like, final thing, because it's not Patrick Dempsey, because it's not Mark Kincaid, it's tough because it's like, well, it's her husband. Does it really matter if it's not the person that I wanted it to be, right? Because it's like, okay, well, there's still a part of me where it's like, I feel like he shouldn't be killed off because of what he means to Sidney. But then also, again, the stakes and kind of the reasoning we went through. And then also, well, it's not Mark Kincaid. I never envisioned her with a Mark Evans. Any of this stuff. So it's like, well, I don't really care about him too much. Maybe they'll make me care, but as of right now, I don't care too much. Besides, he's the fictional husband of Sidney for all this, and he's the father of these kids. A reason enough, I would say, to not want him to die, but it's not as much of a reason as if it was Patrick Dempsey's, right? So I mean, that's just an extra thing. It shouldn't really matter, to be honest, right? Like when they're crafting the movie, they should not keep those things in mind. But it is something that I keep in mind, at least just a little. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think he's a goner? Do you think maybe he'll survive? Let me know. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.